Okay, well, we're back, obviously, a new day, and today I've been working on a lot of flutes, so I might not be dressed in the finest of apparel, but that's not what we're here about anyway. So right now, we've routed out the inside of our flute blank, and you've got these two pieces, like we drew the marking right here, like we talked. You know, basically, you want to mark the distance that you're going to have as the air hole, the air chamber, and then you want to mark the distance that you're going to use for the actual flute chamber itself. And this is what it looks like. You notice it's a little rough in there, and I'm going to show you one of my tricks that I've been using for a long time since I've been making flutes, which is about 25 years now. I'm going to show you that trick on how to clean all this up. So let's see. First thing we want to do, however, when we were measuring the distance in there with the router, we want to check and see if the depth went right. You could always use a flat edge up against it, but I can pretty well eyeball it. Pretty dang good. We'll know after it's turned around. I'll see if we can zoom the video camera in on the inside of the flute so you can see what it looks like. But this flute, you're wondering why I've got it out. This is actually my pattern flute. I'm not one of those people, like we mentioned earlier, that, you know, measures the diameter and determines what amount of volume, you know, the flute can hold, and that's basically what volume of air it can hold determines the lowest note, and then you place the fingerings accordingly. I don't do that. I use a pattern flute. This flute's about 15 years old. It's a style that I used to make, kind of real simple, kind of a neat little bird block shaped like a wood duck decoy, but really extremely simple. But one of my favorites. It's actually the first one I made in this Cherokee flute style. And that bottom note on this particular flute is a little bit on the high end, whereas normally for people in the industry, it's pretty funny saying that, people that are interested in Native American flutes, I usually make it about maybe a quarter a step, or between a quarter and a half, which is about 3/8 of a step lower in tone, simply to keep it in tune, because currently this note isn't in tune, but I know all this and I like to play it that way. That's the reason I made it like this. So I like having my lowest note being slightly sharp. It's the way I tend to play, and it's not the way I make everybody else's flutes, just my own personal. I tend to make it go flat myself, and that's why I like it to be a little higher. But that's me, once again. Anyway, long story short, this is a very special piece of river cane. It's indigenous. We talked about it in some of the other videos. This particular piece of river cane came from Louisiana, but it's a species that belongs to the Native American culture specifically. I mean, the link right here has its counterpart somewhere down there. And we prefer to use this. Lately I've been using a lot of bamboo to make my river cane and bamboo flutes. I've been using the bamboo more often than not. But today, once again, back on the Western Cedar flute, what I've got here is a flute blank that has a knot hole in this piece. Sometimes knot holes can be beautiful, and sometimes they can be ugly. This particular one, I have decided to put the knot hole in the back of the flute. It won't be seen as often. The front of the flute will have some of the knot hole here. It'll be rounded off and look kind of interesting, but you always want to look at the wood that you're working with and determine what would be the best face of the flute, the face being the part where the holes and the fingerings are. So determine what the best face of the flute is. And we're going to use this one because, once again, ugly knot hole in the back. A lot of knot holes are pretty, but this one just don't do it for me. And although a lot of people have their ways of marking these things, I really like markers. Markers make a big impression. And you can kind of see here, here's the sound hole of the flute, the one that makes the noise. Here's the fingerings. And then here, this hole that I told you I put in it, which actually makes it a little sharp, is the actual distal end of the flute, is the terminating point of the flute itself. In other words, if I cut it off with a saw right there, for all intents and purposes, it would sound very close to the same as what it does now. It actually gives it a little bit more of an echo and helps it retain some of the back pressure that causes the other notes to do things that they do if you'd make it this way. But I don't make most of my flutes this way these days, not unless they're custom special order or I'm doing something special. So anyway, what we're going to do is hold these two beside one another. You may use a different system. Once again, you're using that 6-hole flute pattern that we talked about in other videos. I keep referring to my other videos. I'm taking for granted you've watched them. If you haven't watched them, please feel free to go back. But the 6-hole flute pattern that I use is one that a lot of other people began their flute making journey on. And when I use that flute pattern, I know that you have to have the diameter of the material you're using, the interior diameter, has to be smaller than most of the modern 6-hole flutes these days to get it to play right. And once again, to learn what playing right and all that, we're talking about now is referring to, please see the other videos. But unlike that, the 5-hole flute has a lot more of leeway, a lot more of change and difference you can make in it in diameter without having to change the figurines greatly. The diameter of this particular piece of wood is about, let's go back and check, roughly 3/4 of an inch, and that's what it is right now. Anyway, you'll see what I'm talking about in just a second. But so 3/4 of an inch. Once again, same fingerings will work on a 1/2 inch diameter tube and on 1 inch and up to 1 1/4 inches. But when you get up there, the pitch of the flute is still kind of high compared to the diameter of the material. So you're better off learning new fingerings at that point and new hole spacings. But anyway, we're going to go ahead and drill this, and you can kind of follow me into my little workshop area and see what we're going to do there. Okay, so what we're going to do is actually drill all the holes, including the sound hole, out from the inside of the flute. This makes a big difference, and once again you'll see why in just a second, but when we drill them out from the inside of the flute, it puts the scar tissue on the other side, which is eventually going to be routed off with our lathe. If you didn't notice, I went ahead and marked 2 flute blanks while I was out there. It is crucial to get this hole in the center and as close to the edge there as possible, although there are some experimenting areas that people do here to change the position of the sound hole. I don't do that. I like it to be up there because it produces the clearest note. And if you've ever drilled anything, you'll know what I'm talking about, the scar tissue being on the outside instead of on the inside of this tube. When the drill starts to go through the material, usually it doesn't make as big a scar as it does when it comes out. Plus, we're going to go back and sand this in just a second. So it's going to be gone anyway. Here's my second one. A flute blank like this only consists of 2 pieces. And this is a second flute that I'm drilling now, not the back side of my first flute. So just keep that in mind, just in case you're confused as to what I'm doing and why I have 2 of them. Just thought I'd go ahead and do another one, but you'll see one of them's drilled and one of them's not. This is a pair, and then the other one's drilled and this one's not, and that's a pair. So we're going to stop there and go back out and do some things to the inside of it, and then we're going to go back and turn one. Okay, so we've got that part of it done. We've got 2 separate flute blanks drilled. Now we're going to do a really neat part. Which is just burning the inside with our little torch here. So it'll blaze up on you if you burn it too quickly. Or if you turn torch bottles upside down, sometimes they go out. Other ways to do this, of course. It's the way I've been doing it for a long, long time. This is a fresh torch bottle. They always seem to be overpressured You want to burn the inside of both of them. What you don't want to do is burn the edge where the two surfaces of the flutes go together. I don't know if you can notice or not, but there's some hairy fibers inside of these flutes, and burning it, not only does it harden the flute, but it immediately gets rid of those hairy fibers. The reason we don't want to burn this edge right here is because the glue won't stick to burnt wood as well as it does unburnt wood. There was a time when I used to burn and sand them twice just to be extremely thorough. These days I might burn and sand them once again, unless it's a custom order or going to somebody who's going to play it professionally in a big way. Okay, so that's that part. And I didn't really torch the inside of this chamber up here, because if you torch it, it doesn't absorb water as quickly. And I like it to absorb some water. Just to get the hair out of it, it's not a bad idea. And I call it hair, but it's actually the little fuzzy pieces of the wood fiber. Now what we're going to do is just kind of lightly sand it. This is some 100 grit sandpaper that's pretty well wore out. We were using it for some other projects, and I like to use the wore out paper because you sand a whole lot of things that are burnt, you destroy your paper in a second. And you want to make sure you do a very thorough job of this. And then you want to hit it from the other direction to make sure that you get it all cleaned out nice. The less obstacles that the flute has to encounter, well, the air has to encounter on its way out of the flute, the higher quality the sound and the more beautiful the transitions of notes will be. Okay, and this. You kind of see the difference, and even feel it with my fingers. A little bit of the burnt residue in there, the coal carbon that's building up. But all the hair fiber in there are gone. And what I would really do at this point is heat up a rod and push it through from the inside out. This makes sure that we get all the scar tissue out. I didn't tell you, but I drill any of my holes that are going to be 1/4 of an inch in diameter when I'm finished. I drill them out at a 3/16 diameter bit, and likewise I use 1/4 for 5/16 and so on and so forth. But the reason I do that is because I have a burning rod that I'm going to go back in and true this hole back to 1/4 with fire and heat, instead of with just trusting the actual drill bit itself. And you can look down inside of these holes that are drilled out, and you might not be able to see it on the video by any means, but if you look at them on your own, you'll notice that there's still the scar tissue is around the entire edge of the hole. So that's why I like to use the fire. The fire cauterizes it, carbonizes it, caramelizes it. It heats it up really quick and makes a real nice clean hole for you to play with your fingers. And yeah, if you need to go in and change some of the fingerings just a tiny bit one way or the other, it's easy after that, because the rod itself doesn't just caramelize or carbonize or harden that one tiny little edge of the flute hole. It actually hardens it probably to a good 1/16 of an inch throughout the inside. So you've got plenty of playroom there. That's 1/4 of an inch of diameter that you can actually change with that 1/16 of an inch radius heating area inside of there from the rod. So we'll go ahead and do that. Well, actually, you could go ahead and do that. That's what I would normally do at this point, but today I'm going to go ahead and put them together. Just as I do have absolutely fantastic quality flutes that we like to make, we have really great flutes as well. So this is going to be a really great flute today, instead of one of the, you know, save somebody some money. But anyway, we're going to go ahead and glue this together. And grab some glue real quick. You probably wonder what kind of glue I use. Well, everybody's got their own type. I mean, not only have I been doing furniture work, antique restoration and such and so on for years and years, but I've been laminating everything from boxes to flutes to pipe stems to whatever for a long time. This is not a paid endorsement. This is my own personal opinion. I like Titebond. This is plain old Titebond, which is about $2 for a little can like this, maybe 3. And then you can go up to Titebond 2, which has its specifications. This says it's fast set, short clamp time, water cleanup, non-toxic, heat resistant, unaffected by finishes, strong initial tack, and paintable. Titebond 3 is fireproof, waterproof, moisture resistant. Separate from waterproof, there's a difference. I mean, it's really the cream of the crop, and buying it by the gallon is actually much cheaper per ounce than buying it by a little bottle like this. But what we're going to do is just basically, and sometimes too I would go back and use a sander on this. I can use this sandpaper, which does a little bit, but I usually would run it on my belt sander. There was a time when I would run them through a planer. I don't do that anymore. But what we're going to do is go back and put just a line of glue all the way around. And you'll notice I'm a very hands-on type person about these kind of things. I like to have some physical touching with my flutes. I rub my fingers on the inside. Sometimes that's a bad idea. Some woods, especially oak and a lot of the really hard woods, they'll give you a splinter when you do that, so you might want to watch. But with my glue, it's a habit I have. I don't know when I started it. I know what the logic behind it is, but I will wipe the glue so that it covers the surface that we're gluing together completely. You only need to put it on one side. Some people would go both sides, but on this blank and this blank, I only put it on one side, and it's been doing me justice for a long time. Any of you guys that are more professional flute makers that are wondering why you're watching such a simple basic video, I can tell you one little trick, and you may have figured it out already, that you wonder how someone can make a 2-part flute like this, made out of 2 pieces, instead of boring it out like so many people do, which drifts too far away from tradition for me. You wonder how somebody can do that and have no visible line on the side of the flute whenever you're done. Well, there's 2 reasons that happens. Number one, if you have this area here sanded smooth before you put it together, it really will make the line a lot less visible. I'm adding some more glue here because it actually started drying on me while I'm talking here. Once again, I haven't wasted any time, but we'll make sure it's got some nice wet glue on it. There's a piece of scar tissue fell off. But anyway, one part of getting the line, the visible seam, off the sides of these flutes, which probably, had they known some of the big top industry flute makers that use that boring machine, would have probably kept doing it this way. I do it this way for a lot of reasons, not just because of the tradition, but it allows you to clean it up on the inside before you put it together. You get to inspect it and see exactly what you're doing. There's no guesswork in this. I mean, anyway, and this is also important too. A lot of what I do, and I say no guesswork, I like to make sure that even though I drew these lines, I did it kind of, you know, maybe less refined than the rest of the flute making process. I'm looking inside of the flute to make sure that it's centered when it goes down, so that the edge of where this top hole is here, so that this edge is right at the edge of the other piece, just like it. And if you watch, this is the other trick to keeping your flutes from having visible seams. This is the main trick to keeping your flutes from having visible seams. This is a long, drawn-out video on how to do something that in many cases I can do in much less than an hour total time. Usually 20 minutes would be my total time on making a flute like this, including sanding, finishing, and whatever application of either lacquer or, you know, more traditional materials like the wax that we make. Okay, first part I glued was the part where the sound hole is. So I like to make sure that it's nice and solid there. It's okay to clamp that piece in the center like this. Anywhere you have wood showing, you know, where the solid part of the flute is, you can clamp it right on top of that. It's a good spot. You can also clamp this part in the same place. Okay. For the other 8 clamps we're going to put on this thing, we're going to stagger them. I'm going to put one on this edge. When I say edge, this is covering an actual piece of thick wood. There's no thick wood here, it's hollow inside. So if we clamped it down, it's going to break the flute, pushing it inward. So we're clamping it down on the actual piece of the flute that actually has some wood underneath of it, which is the edge of the flute. We put this one here. We're going to put the next clamp down just a little ways, right there. And so on and so forth, until eventually it looks like something out of Frankenstein's lab. Just like the way they make guitars. Those guys use some serious clamps. And then another one, staggering. Anybody wants to know where to get these clamps from, every one of these I bought from Harbor Freight. It's best to get them when they go on sale. They're not super expensive, but they're about the best thing in the world. You wonder why I'm using such a giant clamp, like one that has a bar on it so long? These are the same clamps I use to make my boxes with, which we haven't discussed. But I make a lot of medicine boxes for people, and I need big clamps for that. You'll notice while you're clamping too that some of the clamps seem to be getting a little loose. There's a reason for that. The pressure pushing down from this one or that one actually, believe it or not, can cause the next one to get loose, and so on and so forth. We've got one left, and I know I told you not to put them in the middle, but I'm going to go ahead and put one in the middle of an empty spot of flute, but I'm not going to tighten it that tight for the simple reason that I don't want to break it. So this is about 30 minutes drying time, I think the bottle says. 30 minutes. Do not stress joints for 24 hours. I'm not telling you to. It's dangerous as all get out, but I could turn this flute in about an hour. Maybe 2 hours, as long as it's, you know, not bad weather, an hour, and 2 hours if it's damp outside or maybe a little humid. We're in southern Alabama here, and you would think it'd stay humid all the time, but as I mentioned, the glue was drying as I was applying it. So we've got this other one. You know, I don't have 10 million clamps, and we're going to set it aside. I do have a procedure, kind of like Henry Ford. Here's one that I've already glued together, exactly the same fashion as that. We're going to turn it around. So we'll be right back with you.